Hello everyone, welcome to this week's episode of the Sky Sports F1 podcast with me, Matt Baker. We've decided to go full mailbag this week and answer your burning questions. So to help me do that, I've managed to pin down Ant Davidson. Ant, hello, how are you doing?
Hi Matt, yeah, all good, thank you. Yeah, good to be here with you.
Yeah, good to have you. Excited for Australia? We were just chatting about it, weren't we, before? I swear it's moved earlier. So the overnight work that we're going to be doing here at Sky is going to be going on even earlier. Don't know which way my body clock's going to switch.
Exactly, yes. I'm really looking forward to the race, really am. It's I think we've had a bit of a snapshot of different cars and drivers' performances around two quite different circuits in Bahrain and Jeddah. But now we come to Melbourne, a parkland circuit, which it's very high speed, bit higher speed actually than Jeddah, and puts the car slightly into a different window even than that of Jeddah. So different surface as well, which produces quite a bit of grip, a bit more of a front limited circuit. So yeah, lots of different nuances to the track in Melbourne that I think could really shake up the order. Particularly when it comes to stuff like, downforce levels, that we saw how much of a difference it was from Bahrain to Jeddah. And then Melbourne sits slightly higher speed, like I say, so requires a little bit of a difference from the downforce once again. And hopefully you'll see a bit more of a shake up in the order because of that.
That's an exciting prospect, Ant. You've sold this weekend already to our listeners and viewers. So look, we've got loads of questions to get through for you. Some brilliant ones sent in. But I want to start by talking mainly about your role as a simulator driver for Mercedes. And some people will know that you work with the Mercedes team, some people won't. So just break it down for us in very sort of simple terms, what that role entails and what, I guess, use this weekend as an example. What does sort of a typical weekend in the life of a sim driver look like?
Well, I don't really talk about it too much, the sim role with Mercedes. I like to, when I'm behind the microphone or in front of the Sky Pad, I very much treat it as completely unbiased. Actually, on a race weekend, I purposely completely cut all communication with the team, so I can be more genuine in my view and also the way I anticipate their weekend or even comment on their weekend. In many ways, I'm maybe a bit more harsh on them than with other teams because I know the work that goes into the behind the scenes with that team, and I know the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into operating such a successful F1 team. So yeah, away from a Sky weekend, I'm very much in part in working with the team in the sim. It's a small role. I see it as a small role, but I like to approach that with 100% dedication when I'm in there to try and get the best out of future developments, try and get the best out of the car when they're there at the circuit. So for this weekend, for example, it's not a Sky F1 weekend for me. I'll be on the Friday straight after FP2. I'll be doing what they call race support. So I'll be in the simulator going through a few different options of setup for the next day's FP3 session. So while they're sleeping over there, we'll be working through our early morning after FP2 and all the way through their night to then deliver them at the track some different options that I've kind of given the virtual thumbs up to, and then they can take, if they want to, they can take the, based on what they've learned from the circuit, they can then take the setup item or option that we feel in the simulator team that had worked better than what they've been running at the track. And sometimes it's actually the two different cars will run different setups, and I'll try both of their setups, which is fascinating. It's very subtle, as you can imagine, and it takes a lot of brain power and feeling to actually feel the differences of their setup sometimes in the sim, because you haven't got as many cues as you do in real life, so you're trying to fill in the missing pieces. But I've been doing it a long time. Since 2010 I've been with the team in all their different guises since they first got a simulator, and I've seen all the different iterations of sims through those years, that have gone by. So I know how it works. I know what I'm looking for when I'm doing the race support stuff. So that's the race support, and then you've got more of the generalized testing items, say future updates that may never see the light of day in real life, but we can test them in the sim, and that's a really fascinating part of the whole virtual world, is the fact that you can do testing without actually being at the track and test wacky ideas that, just a concept that, like I say, will never come to fruition, but maybe it will. Maybe it gives you a direction and where to take the car, and you go, okay, that works. So if we can make that a reality and fit within the regulations, then that's a really good direction to try and pursue and worth spending our money on. So it gets me up in the morning, Matt, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, fascinating. I think it's what I find interesting about it is a very efficient way of working, isn't it, for a Formula One team? In the era of the cost cap, like you mentioned, it's really important to maximise the time on track. And I guess, obviously, you are sort of the first buffer, aren't you, between an idea being from concept to reality and how good it will be. Speaking of ideas, we did get a question in about what you've learnt, if anything, from Lewis Hamilton in the simulator. Have you learned anything that you've applied to your own driving, sort of in the other of things, kind of as information kind of gone the other way to you? Because obviously you're still racing and you're still active in the racing community.
Well, it's funny, whenever the race drivers come in, and it's not unique to Lewis, although he is obviously very competitive as a driver and as a person. So whenever the race drivers generally get into the simulator, it's quite funny because it's all about the lap times. They just want to. They don't want to drive quick. They want to focus on their own performance, and rightly so. They come in to gain knowledge for their own performance, and you're always trying to make it more and more realistic. So they're working with, say, the time modeling group or the vehicle dynamics group, and they're trying to say, look, in the real car it felt like this. The way the wind affects the car in reality feels like this, and if we do this or that, then I'm sure we'll get closer to reality, and therefore other things that we filter in the future, if we've got Ant or any of the other test drivers in the sim trying this stuff, we know as race drivers that they're testing things that are closer to the mark and therefore should have a better crossover in the future. But they're competitive beasts and they want to beat each other and they want to beat everybody else. So when they step into the sim, it's so hard for them to put that aside and in a very selfless way to just deliver everything for the team. I hope I'm painting the picture well here, and that there are two very different camps when it comes to the way you use a simulator. When I go there, it's 100% for the team. I put my ego outside when I get into the sim room. I leave that at the front door, and I'm there for the team. I'll stay late if I have to for them. I only live down the road, so that's a real benefit for me and for them. And if I feel like something will really benefit the two drivers at the track or the team, like I used to do in my old test driver days, I've just slotted straight back into that role, and I find that easy, really.
I've got to ask you, Ant. We learned after Saudi Arabia that there was a issue, wasn't there, with the correlation of the simulator to the real on-track data that Mercedes seemed to be getting. Is there any light you can shed on that, and what has been happening since Saudi Arabia to try and get those to fall more in line?
Well, it's a really interesting question, really interesting topic right now. So I did a lot of the pre-event work for Saudi Arabia and Melbourne, actually, using different wing levels. And without giving too much away, like I said before at the start, Jeddah and Bahrain, two very different tracks. So when you start the season, you have to look at your options of wing levels and also your budget, because it's in the cost cap. So you have to limit the amount of wings that you can physically make, because that's the more you have, the more money you've spent. So you try to spread it thinly over the year. You want to look at all the different circuits and say, we might, if we can get away with only building 2 wings, and within those 2 wings, we can run different gurney flaps to create a different parameter within that family of wing group that can probably see us through the whole year, and then we can spend money elsewhere, like the floor, for example. That's what the teams are trying to do today. So you go from Bahrain, where you know it's a high downforce wing, and that wing you'll see come up later in the year when we go to slower speed circuits. Bahrain, heavy braking zones, very tight corners. And then you go to Jeddah, which is much higher speed, the fastest street track in the world. But it's not quite Melbourne spec. So you go to Jeddah and you say, well, you could run the Bahrain wing. You could run that in its lowest downforce form and see how we go. But you'll probably have a really draggy car. And we saw a few of those cars out there in Jeddah, didn't we? The McLaren, for example, was quite slow in a straight line, blisteringly fast through the higher speed section of the track. So it just depends where you've targeted that tipping point to be before you've even started the season.
It's all about compromise, isn't it? That seems to be what Formula One seems to be, particularly now, as we were saying, in the cost cap era. And we've had a really interesting question here about some of the drivers like Hamilton, Ricciardo and Perez, who've been in Formula One quite a long time and who have all proven to be very successful drivers within the sport. But is there any theory that these guys are struggling with the new era of ground effect cars? Do you think this is a question from someone online, do you think that actually that they're perhaps struggling for confidence versus the newer guys who aren't so used to driving the older type of Formula One cars? Can you see any correlation within that?
It's a really good question. And every driver has their car and their generation where they felt absolutely at one. I certainly did as a driver. I can think back to cars I've driven, categories I've driven where I've gone, yeah, that car, that era, that was my car. That's when it just fitted the way I wanted to drive. And yeah, definitely over the course of a long career, say like Lewis has had or Fernando, they will look back on cars they've driven and say, yeah, I felt more at home in that car, not quite as at home in that car. I think those drivers are incredibly adaptable, and to the untrained eye, you'd never really notice the differences. But there are definite nuances to it. And I've seen many drivers struggle in single seaters and then perform really well in touring cars or sports cars, and vice versa. On top of that, what complicates it further is that if you haven't got a very competitive car, it can also do a bit of damage sometimes to the psyche of a driver, and without even knowing it, can put you into a position where you're not getting the best out of yourself as an athlete. And then it depends on the teammates that you have as well. So anyone going up against Max Verstappen, of course, may not get the best out of themselves because they feel too under pressure. Maybe it will spur some other people on to reach new heights they've never been able to achieve before as a driver by having a teammate like him. So yeah, it's a really good question. Unfortunately, I don't have a concrete answer for it, but it's definitely worth thinking about. And it's a really interesting, like psychological impact that it has for a driver, depending on how the car's performing, how it feels to drive, and who you're up against, whether you're at the front of the grid or at the back of the grid, who you're up against, who's your direct competition. There are too many permutations to it already to have a definite answer.
But also, by the flip side of that is Lewis Hamilton, Fernando Alonso. These are hugely talented drivers, obviously many world championships between them. I'm sure they can make it work. They could probably drive my VW Polo and make it into a pretty good race car if they really wanted. So yeah, it's a very interesting point. And yeah, maybe we'll see further down the line them, getting used to different cars or driving different categories as well. Few more questions then. So Ivor wants to know, is there a reason as to why Alpine have had such a downfall in performance this year?
Yeah, so we've really seen Alpine fall from being at the sharp end of the midfield pack, just teetering on the edge, weren't they, to breaking through to be a consistent thorn in the side of the likes of Ferrari and Mercedes or McLaren to now very much at the back of the grid. So it just goes to show, if you tread water for too long, or if you've changed your concept like they have, and the best way to look at it is a bit like if you're building a skyscraper and you're fighting another team of architects and engineers building a skyscraper, and you start with a set of foundations that you think are going to be good enough, and you look over your shoulder and you see a very different set of foundations going on over there. Anyway, regardless, you start building up and you build as high as you can go, and you get to the point where things become a little bit rickety, and you realize that your competition's still going strong and they're still building the things not moving an inch. What do? Do you carry on? Do you re-engineer it and carry on going, if we just do a bit more scaffolding or support structures, we can get a bit higher, but I think they might get right up there and we're still kind of midway up. So, right, let's cut our losses, knock the whole thing down, redo the foundations. That's where we're at. And I think that's what's going on now with the cost cap. You've got to, and these complex cars, like I say, it's almost a case like Alpine they've just broken up the foundations. They've gone, you know what, we're off to a dead end here. Redo everything from the start, build from the ground up. And of course, other people have carried on putting a bit more performance on their car over the winter. And sure enough, you turn up and you're last. But it might not last that long. You know, if you've got a good starting base that you believe is better than where you were, then in time, of course, you'll start to surge forwards and see massive gains every time you get more wind tunnel time or another update comes to the car. You'll start to see much bigger gains, hopefully for their sake, than where they would have been if they just carried on persevering with perhaps a bit of a more of a flawed concept from the start. That's my simple take on it anyway.
Yeah, I really like that analogy of the building work. Very, very, very good. And, you know, I think as well in this era of cost cap, I guess, we've got 24 races for Alpine to catch up. We saw what McLaren did last year in terms of a brilliant mid-season development train that they were on, and they obviously became very competitive by the end. But yeah, there must be a part of Alpine that's sort of thinking, goodness me, yeah, we really do need a bit of a miracle to move further forward. But yeah, I mean, hopefully for their guys and for their fans that they can. I want to talk a little bit about Ollie Behrman's performance in Saudi Arabia, and you were there, Ant, and did plenty of great analysis on the SkyPad. But I want to know where do you think Ollie's performance has left the driver market? Do you think it was already quite a volatile driver market, wasn't it, in regards to there are a lot of drivers out of contract this summer? So do you think adding another driver who's got a great chance in Formula One, who's already proven himself to be able and up to racing Formula One, do you think that's almost made the driver market more volatile and more explosive when it comes to silly season, as it were?
Yeah, Ollie Behrman's performance was remarkable. It really was. I know, like I said on the day, I know he had the second best car by quite some margin, but still, to only lose 9 seconds to Charles Leclerc from the moment he passed Hulkenberg in the race through to the end, when he was clearly physically really struggling as well, around a anti-clockwise circuit, lots of left-hand corners, completely unconditioned to driving such machinery in amongst the best single-seater drivers in the world with the spotlight on you at Ferrari. Honestly, what he did, many drivers, not just young drivers, would be looking at that performance thinking, wow, hats off to you, mate, because that's the kind of dream performance anyone would be looking to have if they were ever given that opportunity. No matter how experienced they were, for getting chucked in an FP3 session into a car you barely know, if not know at all. Remarkable, really remarkable. So yes, he's very much put himself in the spotlight at the top of people's lists in terms of new drivers to Formula One that should be or could be given a go. So yeah, I'm sure there are going to be lots of drivers looking over their shoulder now that Behrman is a very valid prospect to come and take your drive. You have to look at the Haas drivers, you know, with the relationship that Haas have with Ferrari, the fact that he is a young Ferrari Academy driver, jumped into the car first time, delivered, very solid professional job. Yeah, maybe you'd want to nurture that for the future, and why not put him into a Haas in the short term and let him develop further. Other drivers are out there as well. We can't forget the likes of Fred Vesti or Felipe Drogovic, just to name a few of the F2 drivers. They're just there waiting in the wings, waiting to have their chance like Behrman had. And of course, it throws the driver market right open for next year. And then you got the big dogs moving around as well with Lewis to Ferrari, and where does Carlos Sainz go? And it's really tantalizing. I can't wait to see how it all shuffles and how people find their way. I hope we do see some fresh blood as well in Formula One next year. I think some drivers out there are fully deserving of it, as Behrman has showed. So yeah, hopefully we'll see a bit of a mix of the older established drivers finding different seats, and then some new drivers coming in. But there are a finite amount of seats out there, as there always has been more drivers than there are seats out there, and that's the predicament that all of the teams and drivers find themselves in.
Yeah. How would you feel, Ant, if you were one of those drivers that you mentioned, add Liam Lawson into that mix as well, one of those drivers on the sidelines, and you see, there's I don't necessarily need to name the drivers, but there are quite a few drivers still on the grid in Formula One who've been around for 10, 15 years, who are taking up some of those spots from the younger drivers. Do you see the tension there? Do you understand the frustration from those younger drivers?
Absolutely. I've lived and breathed it. I've been on both sides, actually. I've been the driver that's just waiting to have your opportunity. Any given moment, you jump in and you want to show what you can do. And you're looking at older drivers, the older established drivers, still there, reaping the benefits of their experience and predictability from within a team. They're a safer option in many ways. If you're trying to convince many people within a team, within an organization, as to who you should take, sometimes the easy option is actually to stick with the known quantity. Even if you feel deep down that they might not be the next Michael Schumacher, it's easier to convince people to go with a more established driver because, yeah, look what they've done in the past. They generally keep their nose clean in races, and everyone seems to have a bit more of a confidence factor when it comes to that type of driver. That have been around and seen it all and deliver pretty decent results. But if you're looking for magic, that's the difficult part for a team, because you'll know deep down that they might not be magic, but they're going to deliver a pretty good result. And if you are looking for that magic, you're looking for that extra 2 or 3 tenths a lap, that Verstappen factor that Red Bull fell into, and what a fairy tale story that's been. That's what the teams would love to achieve. So, but it takes a bit of guts, actually, and it's not a scientific process. So it's not easy, but yeah, hopefully we will see some teams take a bit more of a plunge and fulfill those drivers' wishes, and we can see some excellent performances, and maybe, who knows, discover the next Verstappen.
Yeah. Linked to that, and sort of the final question I want to ask you then, and this is from Bethan, is should we be giving rookies more than just 2 practice sessions a season? And I guess if we do give them more practice sessions a season, they become more known quantities, don't they? And perhaps they're less of a risk. If we look at perhaps Logan Sargent, who struggled last year, James Vowles made the point, didn't he? He said, well, look, he's only had Bahrain, 3 sessions or 2 or 1.5 sessions in Bahrain to get to grips with the car. It's not a shock that it's taking a little bit longer with someone like him than maybe with a more experienced driver.
Yeah, exactly. Time is very limited now for these drivers. I feel sorry for them, because when I was a young driver, we had pretty much endless laps of Barcelona or Jerez or wherever the European testing scene took us. We would cover anywhere from 10 to 15,000 kilometers of testing miles every year. as a test driver. Then we'd be driving on the Fridays as well at a Grand Prix weekend with all the all the glitz and glamour that surrounded a weekend, all that extra pressure and people watching you. And it was absolutely brilliant, and it was a very different time. And I think we need to cater for the young drivers a little bit more in that regard. And I think the fans, quite clearly, by this question, quite clearly want to see that happen as well. So it's a balance, isn't it? It's a balance of not spending too much money, which obviously that's the right thing to do, but then it is a sport and you want to be entertained. So it's finding that sweet spot, I think, which is critical for the sport and for the teams to come up with the right answer. I believe it's not great how it is at the moment. I don't think it really caters for nurturing young talent and seeing what they can truly do behind the wheel. Before you put them in, it's still a bit of a risk factor putting somebody in for a whole season. Just look at Nick de Vries for an example. Had that one shiny race in Monza with Williams and everything's great. This is going to be brilliant. Look what he's done in sports cars and Formula E. It's a shoe-in here for success. And then, unfortunately, without that mileage, without the chance to really integrate with the team and get to learn another new car, all the different circuits that he's never been to before, it was a real difficult challenge for him. So, and that's just one driver. So, and he's experienced. So, yeah, but then on the flip side, you got someone like Behrman that jumps in and delivers pretty much straight away. Yeah. So that's the risk that you take as a team, and you don't want it to be that risky. Formula One teams, they live and breathe data, and they want to know who they're putting into their car and how they're going to perform. You wouldn't put a component into one of these cars and not know how it's going to perform. You wouldn't put a new power unit in, or you wouldn't put a gearbox update or aero upgrade. You just wouldn't put something on the car if you didn't know what it was likely to do. And that's the position the teams find themselves in with young drivers these days.
But actually brings us perfectly back full circle, Ant, to the simulator work, doesn't it? Because that's exactly what you were saying at the start. The whole point of simulation is to try and establish patterns and make sure things are going to work. So yeah, look, perfectly cyclical. Well done. Very good. Just time to tell you at home about the timings for this weekend. As we alluded to at the beginning, it's going to be an early start for most of you, or a late night, depending on how you're going to play it. So we're live, obviously, across Sky Sports F1 this weekend, on air with FP1 at 1 a.m. on Friday and FP2 at 4:45 in the morning. Saturday, FP3 on air at 1:10, followed by qualifying at 4:15, and then building up to the race from 3 o'clock before lights out at 4 a.m. on Sunday morning. Set your alarms, but Ant, you'll probably be in the sim by most of that time, so you'll be awake. You'll be knowing what's going on.
I'll be awake.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your time, Ant. Really fascinating. And I mean, there was so many questions we didn't get through, and a lot more about your simulator work as well, which hopefully we'll try and cover off in a few more podcast episodes this year. But yeah, great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us.
No problem. Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, enjoy the Grand Prix.
Very good. Right, we'll be back next Tuesday to look back at the Australian Grand Prix. Hope you can join us then. Bye for now.